For over 2 years, the importing steel industry has been contending with the complexities introduced by the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, as the commencement of the fiscally valid period approaches, significant uncertainties remain. During this transitional period, the European Commission has not fully equipped the industry with the essential calculatory frameworks required to establish clarity in pricing and cost structures. This lack of preparedness has made it increasingly difficult for an already sluggish industry to assimilate the necessary changes and respond effectively to the demands of CBAM compliance. Good morning, first of all. My name is Alexander Julius, representing EUROMETAL, and I'm delighted to introduce to today's webinar, CBAM is coming. Can steel supply chain handle these costs? Organized by Fastmarkets in cooperation with EUROMETAL. Shyamal Patel, head of modeling for carbon markets at Fastmarkets, will give us an overview on the status of CBAM, impacts on the supply chain, loopholes, and finally present the Fastmarkets CBAM Cost Calculator, making compliance more transparent. Following the presentation, a panel of distinguished industry experts will engage in the discussion on the impact on CBAM on both EU and global steel markets. The panel includes Jaap Aardenburg, Head of Trade Affairs, Tata Steel Nederland, Tayfun Iseri, Coordinator at Colakoglu Metalurji in Turkey, and Alfonso Hidalgo, the Calcerrada Chief Economist at UNESID in Spain. The discussion will be moderated by Bolotova, Strategic Markets Editor at Fastmarkets. So enjoy.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for that lovely introduction. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Shyamal Patel, Head of Modeling at Fastmarkets Carbon. As Alexander touched upon, I'd just like to talk you through some of the risks and insights we have been identifying around the CBAM discussion, and to very briefly talk you through the CBAM Cost Calculator, which we have developed and which we have made available exclusively to webinar participants as a means of trying to understand and get to grips with some of the costs and exposure around this topic area. So the first thing I wanted to touch upon here, we have a very diverse and interesting group of participants at this webinar, and it cuts across all elements of the supply chain and the value chain for steel. And CBAM, of course, has an impact throughout the entire chain, but it has different impacts depending on where you sit within this chain. So if we start with the non-EU producer side, then CBAM, of course, is going to affect competitiveness. It is going to create an incentive to potentially trade or resource shuffle and send low carbon product to the European market and higher carbon product to other markets. And of course, it has already been creating a compliance burden and a reporting obligation, which has existed for sort of 2 or 3 years now. Importers are the group most directly impacted by the CBAM. They are responsible for declaring the CBAM emissions associated with their CBAM good imports, as well as buying CBAM certificates and making sure all of this is captured within their contracts. That will then, of course, create an incentive for importers to potentially shift to lower carbon producers and suppliers. And of course, they have the challenge of then writing contracts and passing on those costs to downstream buyers. EU producers are perhaps the most complicated to understand the potential impacts on. While CBAM is designed to level the playing field between EU producers and non-EU producers, phase out of free allowances, which accompanies the CBAM, is a very complex policy regime, and truly leveling the playing field is something which is still very much a matter of discussion and research. And finally, on the downstream side, for our kind of procurement colleagues on the line, CBAM will affect the costs of purchasing metal in the markets, of course. and it will also ultimately affect the price of downstream goods and create incentives to shift towards lower carbon materials and green procurement potentially as well. There's been a lot of uncertainty around when those impacts will materialize and when we'll know more about the size of those impacts. And one thing we briefly wanted to cover is when the uncertainties will be realized and when we'll know more. So we've taken an example here of a contract for metal delivery into the EU market in January 2026, a contract which hypothetically we are saying will be written sometime this month. Now, walking through this from the left to the right, we are expecting sometime in the coming weeks, uncertain to say when, a set of provisional benchmarks to be published related to the CBAM from the European Commission. They have done this in response to a lot of pressure from the market and market participants, given it's still impossible at this point to know how many CBAM certificates will need to be purchased for the 2026 reporting period. They have still not set a timeline for when the final benchmarks will be published, although we are expecting that at this point around the time the EU ETS benchmarks are published in early 2026, as they have put it. Now, focusing on the bottom half of this, the price of the certificates will only be known for January 2026 imports at the end of Q1 2026, because the price depends on the quarterly average in the quarter of import. So if the metal is being brought in January, then you need to know the weekly closing auction prices throughout January, February, and March in order to calculate the CBAM certificate price. Even after all of this is known, you can't actually purchase the CBAM certificates until 2027. So there is a balance sheet risk associated with this, even once those costs are fully known. And then those certificates finally have to be surrendered by the 30th September 2027 as it stands. Now, we've talked about some of those financial and operational risks, and I very briefly wanted to touch on some of the carbon leakage and the commercial and the business risks, which are as significant, if not even more so. And some of the things we've been hearing from the market here at Fastmarkets are around the risk of sort of supply chain shifting, where producers or importers and fabricators may get priced out of the market or become uncompetitive because downstream players choose simply to import a more finished good and avoid CBAM, as CBAM doesn't cover the entire value chain for each of the sectors it covers, and thereby sort of completely avoid CBAM costs. Another key risk we've heard discussed in detail is the risk around scrap. Currently, scrap is exempt from CBAM, and there are various ways of sort of using this to your advantage, where you bring in what is effectively kind of primary metal under the trade codes associated with scrap and gain an unfair advantage there. And on that note, I think I will switch track a little and talk you through the calculator tool that we have developed, which can help you to understand the size and the scale of some of these risks. I would encourage you to, if you're able to please visit the link shown on the screen, bit.ly/CBAMCalc, from which you can download the tool and use it after the webinar yourselves. You can download it using file, create a copy, download. Of course, you're also welcome to sort of do that offline. The slides will be shared after the webinar. I very briefly wanted to show you some of the details of the tool before we focus on the insights that it generates. Now, the tool tries to calculate some of the key exposure metrics an importer may face related to the CBAM. It starts by estimating the emissions associated with the imports, and then it turns those into CBAM certificate requirements, i.e. how many CBAM certificates need to be purchased. And finally, it translates that into total and unit costs being per ton of metal imported, what is my CBAM cost in euros? And it generates these outputs using a simple set of assumptions. I will, sorry, just zoom in slightly here so you don't need a magnifying glass to see this. There are 3 input assumptions which are key for the tool, and the version that you're able to download will have exactly the same structure. One is the country of import. The second is the CN code, of course, being the level at which the regulation is applied. And the third being the amount of metal being imported in tons. It's possible to provide additional information into the tool as well in terms of your own emissions factors, your own assumptions on effective carbon price paid, etc. But these are not required fields. These are optional fields. And the final thing I'd like to point out is our parameter dashboard. So from here, you can select different EUA price scenarios, different decarbonization scenarios, different assumptions on the benchmark while we're still waiting for the official numbers to be published, which can help you to understand how your risk exposure and the size of CBAM liabilities will depend on some of these key factors. Cool. Now I'll switch back to talking through some of the insights from the calculator. So just to put our sector, the steel sector, in context here, by import trade value, steel is by far the largest sector currently within the scope of the EU CBAM. As you can see from the left-hand side here, it's sort of 3 times as large as the next largest sector, which is aluminium. It has the 3rd highest effective tariff rate, and here effective tariff rate means the CBAM costs as a proportion of the import value. You can also think of this as being the CBAM cost per metal price, or relative to the metal price. And it has the greatest variation in emissions intensity. Of course, there are many different technologies and approaches which can be used to manufacture steel products, and for instance, electric arc furnace versus blast furnace. And as a result of the different efficiencies of those technologies, there is a very wide spread in emissions intensity. So it is particularly important in steel to know your supplier and to have good facility level emissions intensity data, as using a national average factor or default factors associated with CBAM can be quite punitive. Now, I mentioned there's sort of 29% overall impact, but that masks a very high level of variation. And here we have tried to show some of the impacts along the steel value chain for different products. What is shown on the chart is the ratio between the CBAM unit cost and the price. So if it's 30% or if it's 10%, you can think of it, the CBAM cost as being 10% of the current market price for that product. And along the top of the chart, you can see the current import value into the EU of each of these products. I'd like to call out here some of the maybe interesting, maybe obvious, depending on your expertise, insights. Iron, steel slabs, upstream and semi-finished products tend to have high variation, and they tend to have a high cost share as a percentage of product price or trade value. And this is because there's fewer processing steps applied and high emissions intensity associated with the processing steps that have been applied in terms of blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace based processes. And the other thing I'd like to call out here is just how important it is to know your emissions factor. You can see the range between the highest and the lowest emissions factor for each product on the chart as the top bar and the bottom bar. And again, these are just for national averages, so comparing across countries. Once you compare across individual facilities, the spans would be even larger. And the final thing I'd like to briefly talk to before I hand over to Julia Bolotova, my colleague, and our esteemed panelists, is how large are these costs in the context of trade measures in place today. So we have taken the analysis we've done using the cost calculator, and we have generated this chart where each dot represents a product country combination. So for instance, Chinese exports of steel slabs or Indian exports of pig iron would show up as dots here into the European Union. And the trade value is shown on the x-axis and the CBAM cost per unit of price on the y-axis. So if we compare these against some of the current US regime's tariffs, you can see on the right-hand side how much of the current import value of iron and steel into the European Union falls within different thresholds. So based on our current analysis, $7 billion worth of EU imports have an effective tariff rate of 50% or above, i.e. more material than the highest kind of tariff rate shown on the graphic, and a further 17 billion is above 25% as well. So clearly very material cost increases potentially here, very material effective tariff rates being applied, and high dispersion across countries and products as well, which adds to the complicating factors here. Thank you very much. On that note, I will hand over to Julia and our esteemed panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shyamal, for your very insightful presentation. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. I would like to highlight once again that slides will be available for all registered participants. And I would like to encourage you to drop your questions in the chat, because we would like to keep it as interactive as possible. I see there are already quite a few, but I would like to start with the one Shyamal has already touched on, and it has been quite hot discussion recently, that CBAM is designed as a tool to protect European steelmakers, to establish level playing field. We all heard that a million times, but we also are very well aware that there are certain loopholes in the system, as Shyamal already mentioned, that CBAM doesn't cover steel intensive goods, so-called steel derivatives. So I'm just wanted to ask our panelists from your perspective, how likely it is that the European Commission will expand scope of CBAM to steel derivatives, and how important it is for the industry. JJ, would you please start on that?
Yes, of course. Thank you absolutely for the question, because this is in fact the elephant in the room, also in a much wider context. I think all in Europe we are, let's say, aiming for a resilient full supply chain, and also allowing the economic independency, economic resilience of Europe, and also its strategic autonomy. And of course, we need a level playing field at all levels, in fact, in the supply chain. And what we are now seeing, and also with some other measures as announced last week, that the role of steel derivatives is key in this. Because it will be very easy, in fact, when the list remains as is, that you indeed can play around probably, or let's say, make slight modifications to your product, put it in a different tariff code. And we have seen examples, for instance, in the tube business, as a typical one, for instance, where it is relatively easy, in fact, to circumvent. The Commission is absolutely more than aware of it, but the Commission also has a very strong drive to make everything, let's say, fair, in a fair way, meeting the interests of all involved. And they're also creating, unfortunately, also a lot of complexity, which we are also fighting against as users. So that will indeed be the key challenge. But the fact that we need derivatives expanded is key. And the Commission is also aware of that, but needs time. And the question is, of course, do we have that time? Thank you.
Thank you. Alfonso, do you have something to add as an economist?
Yeah, well, first on the process, the Commission, as far as in the other measure from last week, the Commission didn't exactly position themselves about getting wider in the scope. In the CBAM, yes, they do. They have the compromise to publish something sometime in this final quarter of the year. So there will be an assessment on this, and in this case, I think that they will go further. They will have some more products. I don't know exactly how many of them, because CBAM is already wider than pure steel and tubes, and because CBAM already takes into account more of the 73 chapter. For example, this steel structure under the 7308 are already into CBAM without any enlargement. So I think that some enlargement will appear. Of course, I'm sure that not as big as we would like, no. But it's well, it's. I think it's full. So it's absolutely necessary, and it will more or less happen.
Thank you, Alfonso. And Tayfun, could you please also share your view on steel derivatives inclusion and CBAM?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I pretty much agree with both of my colleagues, because when CBAM gets implemented, we have to look downstream what the actual users are going to be affected, and I'm sure there's going to be some regulations to that fact. But when you go back and look at the United States, I mean, it's not the CBAM part of the United States. But right now, as you know, they're adding more taxes for derivatives, because they're trying to protect their end users downstream. So this is a really complicated situation that's going to be solved. It's complicated, but nothing is complicated enough where you cannot come up with a solution. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of a solution, but it has to be fair both to the steel producers and both to the steel end users. And this is what we're expecting.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your answers. And yeah, that's good to know that it's on the table. But as usual, timing is the key, and we are a bit short of timing. And speaking of that, I would like to very briefly take this question, because I saw it at least 3 times repeating in the chat. When benchmarks will be published according to you? We already touched that it's early 2026, possibly, but maybe any of you have more precise. Yeah, Alexander, please.
Well, the benchmark, I mean, we were talking about the provisional benchmarks, which the Commission stated that they will publish some shortly. And we emphasized that during our meeting with TechSuit a few weeks back, because the official ones are only going to be published beginning of 2026. So this is going to be unchanged. The only thing I would like also to add to Jamal's calculation, and I think this is pretty important, is the ETS value in the calculation. That despite the fact that the European Commission is going to make actually quarterly averages to be published at the end of each quarter, this has only actually a pretty, well, informative character. Because the final ETS value or the final CBAM certificate value will only be after opening of the CBAM platform, where you can buy, where the declarants can buy the CBAM certificates. This will be in 2027, and I do not think that they will then consider the retrospectively the quarterly average values of 2026. This means then those because it's mirrored, basically the CBAM certificates are mirrored by the then current or the then prevailing ETS values, that means you will have to pay the value of the CBAM, that means the ETS certificate value at that date, which means 2027. So that means that's another burden, or it's another obstacle, that those average quarterly ETS value will not help the declarant in the final calculation.
Thank you, Alexander. That's a very important thing to emphasize. Like everyone has been stressing, we don't know the final price of our imports in 2026, and that's a big problem. Jaap, you have something to add, please?
Yes, thank you. Now, about the default values, and perhaps let me shed some light on the challenges, in fact, also the Commission is having. I'm not saying it is okay, but it is also something we need to deal with. You need to have a clear alignment between ETS and CBAM, and you're all aware that the definitions are different. We also see now a move from what they call ETS phase 4 to phase 5, and phase 5 will also be the benchmark, also be linked to CBAM. The problem the Commission is having right now that they are still in the phase of collecting the actual data to calculate the phase 5 values. And that has not finalized yet. And that means that they cannot assess the default values. What now has been agreed, in fact, within the taxoot, so within the Commission, is that indeed to support the market, there will be professional values for CBAM, default values be published, but based on the ETS phase 4. And that will be in the course of November, December. And the final figures, to my understanding, based on phase 5, will not be earlier than March next year. So that is indeed an uncertainty. In a way, we need to, as market participants, we need to deal with somehow. But again, this is also the way, unfortunately, the EU works to do everything precise and in a correct way, to have a very clear alignment, in fact, between CBAM, of the ETS system of the European producers and the CBAM, the charges, the duties to be paid by the importers, and to create there that absolute level playing field we all want. Thank you.
Thank you. Alfonso, please.
Yeah, one more thing to say is that even if we have these provisional benchmarks in this last quarter, the target of the Commission with ETS is reducing emissions. What does it mean? That it's if provisional are based on phase 4 and then phase 5 will need to be published, what we know is that phase 5 will be lower than 4. So once you have your benchmark or your provisional benchmark, if you have some doubt about how the definitive will look like, it will be somehow smaller than any orientation that you have right now. No? So because it's going down until benchmark is 0. No, that's the final target of the Commission. So definitive benchmarks will be lower than what you could anticipate right now with this. With these estimations from now on, from fourth quarter.
Thank you, Alfonso. Thank you, gentlemen, for your answers and for your comments. And the next question I would like to take is actually related to handling of the cost, because it was highlighted a few times that how company can actually hedge imports done in 2026 if certificates will only be available in 2027, and if buyers and sellers can actually share the cost, because we've heard from stakeholders several times that there are certain clauses in import offers that would say that CBAM is paid up to a certain threshold. How it is possible? Do you think it's a viable option? And I would like Tayfun, please, to start on that as an exporter to the EU.
Actually, nothing is really certain on our side. As Turkey, as an exporter, Turkey is doing a lot of stuff on the ETS, but like JJ said, it has to be linked into the CBAM. That part is missing right now. And one of the main reasons why it's missing is because on the EU side, we need some of the net benchmarks and see what can be done for 2026. So it's going to be, it's going to take time, but eventually somehow these numbers will come out and we'll know what's going to happen. But it has to be, our ETS calculations have to merge with the CBAM and what those benchmarks are. But on the Turkish side, we're missing that. That's definite. We don't know how we're going to be actually doing all the follow-up and how the cost is going to be benchmarked. And right now, we don't have the certificate system on our side, on Turkey's side. So this is something that the minister is working on right now.
So you have your own ETS in the transitional phase 2026, yes? And
yes, but nothing is being implemented right now. It's all. Yeah. I mean, the other day when I was talking to JJ, he said, I'm paying now. Well, we're not paying anything right now. So everything is on calculating, trying to understand what needs to be done, whatever it's going to be done, how it's going to be followed. The system is not there yet. So it's going to be a difficult year for Turkey on our side. But the only thing I know is, like all the conferences that I attend in the United States, they always keep on saying, oh, we're greener than anybody else in the world. We're here. And then I see Turkey is right next to them. So we're supposedly greener. So how all this is going to be put in one bag, and it's going to be fair to everybody, because we cannot just sit here and say, oh, how can I do something more into Europe? It has to be fair. It has to be fair trade. And this is all I got to say.
Thank you, Tayfun. Alfonso, do you have something to add on this cost sharing thing?
Well, the things I have heard, probably there are people here that are closer to the market than me, but that the DDP Incoterm is getting extended, which means delivery duty paid, which I believe is a huge risk for the seller. No, probably I don't know if these are manufacturers or probably traders which are including this Incoterm in their terms of doing business now. But I've hearing it's going on right now. That it really introduces a high risk, and probably it will twist the competitive balance for bigger traders and big companies which have the ability to manage this risk.
So we will potentially face the situation where smaller companies who are unable to handle compliance costs be raised from the market. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, I was thinking on traders, but yes, the smaller traders will have more difficult situation than bigger traders.
Thank you. Jaap, anything to add on that?
Yes, of course. I think that when it gets to, let's say, the risk you're exposed to as a company, I think also with the price calculator and the ranges we know, and also the plans we know, and I think a lot of data we can estimate. I think the duty risk is probably within scope of 10, 20 euros probably per ton. And that can be a lot, but that also can be relatively small, seeing the huge variety, in fact, there is. So in that sense, that is also, I think, that was earlier alluded to, the risk can be assessed there in a reasonable way. And that's also the reason we see the first DDP offers coming up in the market as well, I think. I think a bigger risk is, especially for the smaller players, is, let's say, the handling cost of managing this whole system, and the burden of it. Do you now need to hire someone when you have a smaller company just to be 100% of the time busy with filling systems, And that, I think, is probably for the smaller players a bigger risk than as such, let's say, call it the business risk, where when it gets to, let's say, to pricing as such. And I think that administrative burden, that is a big contradiction in a way. You always hear in the EU, we've seen the omnibus proposal, you probably heard of it, where the Commission was having big words and we make life for businesses easier, we simplify things, also with CBAM. They did an effort to simplify things, but on the other hand, in their hunt for equality and being fair, they immediately impose also a very complex system, with still loopholes, key loopholes in it, under the current regulation, which are not sorted and which create a big burden. Also think about how are companies who want to provide actual values, how is that certification process, how are they being audited, where can you buy the certificates, how does that system work, will there be a secondary market where you can trade certificates, for instance, and you name it, all still very unclear. We also should be aware as well that the Commission needs to create 7 implementation acts in the next 3 months, probably, which is also a huge task for them. In fact, they were also the cause of it themselves. They can only blame themselves for it, that in fact they were too late, in fact, in getting us all being sorted and arranged. But
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alexander, would you like to add something?
Definitely. I think just coming straight to the question that was raised, and seeing the technicalities. I mean, you have to be a registered declarant. That means to be part of the CBAM system in Europe as an importer. So that means, first of all, you need to register as a declarant with the European Commission based on the European EORI number. That means the customs number and so on. So that's a precondition to participate in the purchase of CBAM certificates. Because, and that's also the wider background of the European system when it comes to taxes and duties. The European Union or the European Commission wants to have a direct grip, financial grip, on the ones who have to pay taxes and duties. And they can only do it with European registered companies. So that's very clear. And for that, even if you're a new company registered, you need to provide certain securities. We, for example, my company, we had to present our last 3 years financials and with our EORI number so that they know, yes, this is a regular importer, a reliable importer. They have always paid their duties and taxes, and we can keep them actually liable in case that something happens. So that means, coming to this question, if costs are being shared, this is purely a contractual agreement between the importer, that means the declarant, and the exporter, who is not registered under the European Union. So that, but this has nothing to do with the fiscal relevance and also the obligation that only the registered declarant needs to pay, has to pay, and has to buy the certificates. So just from the technical side.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. And the next question I would like to take, because it was raised a few times, and I heard it many times myself from the industry stakeholders regarding exports. Will the CBAM be equally calculated and charged if steel that you import is processed in the EU, but finished goods are exported outside the EU? Jaap, would you like to start on that?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Julia. Now, in fact, there is still a major loophole on export. And also, again, the Commission did recognize that. And there are 2 elements. First of all, when you are an EU producer and you're exporting, you're facing costs the world, let's say, doesn't have. So let's say like VAT, you expect a kind of compensation for that. But CBAM is not a taxation, but a duty. So a solution needs to be found there. Another one, again, then we get also to the derivatives discussion. When you are talking about a steel-intensive good, then you also expect that an export solution is also in line with derivatives. Again, that is another plea to have the list quickly expanded so that we get a fair system. The Commission will come up with a solution for exports. The drafts I've seen so far are not boding well, I can tell you. It's a complex legal issue, in fact, as it seems, but we need to await what now actually will be written down by TechSud as a solution. But yes, that is one of the key loopholes.
Thank you. Alfonso, anything to add?
No, just I fully agree with Jaap-Jan, and I'm not optimistic either about the solution that the Commission is working on, but it's probably the main issue right now. Even if we are all considering the technicalities of the first day, but those technicalities will be resolved. But the solution for exports is extremely difficult, and but also it's absolutely necessary.
Thank you. I would say that nothing about CBAM is particularly easy, and that's why we're having this meeting. Tayfun, please, anything to add from your side?
I think it's all is said, but it seems like this is going to be a European producers and European importers problem. So that side of the situation has to be solved, and everybody else is going to be positioned themselves according to the final decision is made, because there's still a lot of questions up in the air for the exporters to Europe. So we just have to wait and see. And I saw some questions a few minutes ago. Who's going to be paying the CBAM cost? Well, CBAM cost is not going to be. It's not paid. Somehow it's going to be balanced. I mean, if Turkey has an ETS system and Europe has an ETS system, somehow that's going to be balanced, and the difference is going to be paid. So this is. I saw some questions, few questions on that perspective. That's my answer to that question, but I'm not sure if I'm correct. But I think it's going to be somehow be balanced between the two.
Exactly. There were several questions how emissions paid in a origin country will be taken into consideration, and potentially, yes, the Commission will take it into consideration, and those will be deducted from the price of the certificate you are buying. That was raised numerous times during consultations. That was just closed a couple of weeks ago, and we will have to see the final draft to understand how it will be handled exactly. But yeah, thank you for that addition, because it's also a very hot topic, exactly. And also, since we are touching on the third country, I saw the question about the potential exemption of the UK, and also I received many questions about potential exemptions or grace periods for EU trade partners. Do you imagine it is at all possible? Any grace period exemptions, something like that? Alfonso, would you like to start?
Well, first on the UK, I think that the exemption of the UK will come via UK, which is like-minded to the EU in terms of climate. UK charging prices of CO2, and so if you have already paid in UK, then you have this price discounted when you take your products into the EU. So that's a way of exempting UK. And the second part, sorry, you were thinking a grace period. Well, this is a regulation. We all know how long does it take to change European regulation. I don't see how you can introduce a grace period in just 3 months. It's I don't see how it and we must play with the information we have, and the last information we have, or the latest information, is a letter from from the European Commission to EUROMETAL, saying that it will go ahead.
Thank you, Alfonso. I just wanted it to be spoken out loud because a lot of people still have hopes that we might get some delays. But
I understand, but I have a background in finance, and in finance you play with the data you have, and then you can speculate. But you have to introduce every available information, and available information so far says nothing about the delay. Of course, there are lots of demands about it, and I understand them, of course, because I would do it if I were an importer and I would have this level of uncertainty. Yes, it's understandable, but the information we have so far has nothing to do with a delay.
Thank you. I guess we'll just move to other question because it was very, very clear overall. Just once again wanted to be spoken of. Another question I've noticed here, it's also been raised a lot of times about some sort of rebate. If, for example, your CBAM, your CO2 emissions are lower in the country of origin, will you get any rebate in the EU? The short answer is no, but could you please elaborate on that for our audience? Who would like to start? Alfonso, maybe?
Well,
since you already spotlighted.
I really never thought about that, but it's not included in the regulation. So, well, if you if you have such big conditions, then you will enter into your advantage will be that you will export to the EU without paying any CBAM. That's the price you get. You won't have to pay anything additional.
Yeah, thank you. Alexandra, I saw your hand was risen. Would you like to add something?
Well, I mean, the precondition of all of that is that any ETS, or let's say similar system of a non-EU country, needs to be acknowledged by the EU. That means the system at all. That's the precondition. And only if this is being acknowledged, then a reduction, that means according to the formula that Shyamal also basically gave us on basis of the FAQ calculation, that means the calculation that was published by the European Commission, then it can be reduced from the emission. So that's purely a calculation that everybody can do. But the precondition is, and that's what also Tayfun and I discussed very many times, is that bring any non-EU system up to the level of the EU system to be acknowledged, because otherwise you will have the danger, or let's say every non-EU country will see the danger of not being acknowledged, and that means not deductible.
Thank you. Jaap, I see you have something to add on that.
Yes, thank you. We should be aware that the EU already did set very strict targets on the emission targets, also imposed on the EU producers. And when it gets to lower values, you also should be aware. I'm not quite sure whether everybody is aware yet that we have also CBAM values per production route, also the default values. So there will be one for the blast furnace basic oxygen route, the traditional route, let's put it like that. The EAF scrap route and the EAF DRI route. So there will be very strict fixed targets. But indeed, when you are below those, indeed the amount to be paid will be zero. The money will not be returned in that sense. So we will see very strict targets. Everybody needs to adhere to.
Thank you.
And by the way, and indeed, to add on the UK, there are countries already part of the European CBAM system outside the EU. Norway and I believe Liechtenstein or Switzerland also will join. And there is being discussed that also the UK, but I'm not sure about the status right now, also will be part of the system. And you have more or less a similar system, and to prevent all the mutual paperwork, to have the UK included in, let's say, a common European CBAM schedule. Thank you.
Thank you. Tayfun, would you like to add something?
To be honest, I don't really have anything to add because we just have to wait, like I said earlier. I pretty much agree. Everybody has already made a statement, so nothing to add.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly. We do not have so many technical details, so yeah, we have to wait and see to see how it will be handled exactly. So okay, let's move further. That's a very specific question, Jaap, to you. It's about DRI EAF target. As you can see, what makes you believe that there will be DRI EAF target? At the moment, there is only discussion at BOF and EAF scrap, and that EAF DRI would have to meet the EAF DRI standard, which would be very unfair. But so you refer, of course. Do you have anything to answer that?
No, nothing really. Only this is the line of thinking the commission is having, and of course, when you are an EFDRI producer, you have nothing to worry about at all in the whole system. But it is distinguished as a separate route apparently.
Yeah, it is separate route that is not widely available. Also, I would say
that is a matter of time because also getting in lowering the carbon emissions of steel making, we all agreeing that this is the go-to technology in the future.
Thank you. And actually, that brings me to next question from myself, because there were a lot of talks that CBAM would actually be a driver for decarbonizing European steel industry and will facilitate green steel adoption. So far, we see that all these decarbonization plans and agenda is a bit on pause because we have other problems to deal with. Do you believe CBAM actually will help to facilitate a green steel agenda in the EU?
Yeah, of course. First of all, to make it perfectly clear, CBAM is an equalization mechanism. It's not a trade defense mechanism or something like that. That is one thing. It creates at least a level playing field between the EU producers and imports. And yes, the situation is such that we need to see the whole situation Europe is in, that we need a viable European steel industry and being also enabled to decarbonize. The fact that a lot of the projects are put on hold or at least being delayed, or there is hesitation, etc., also do have effect with another enormous problem the steel industry is facing on the trade related. I don't want to allude to that because then I need another hour. But it is also enabling, in fact, when the EU industry can operate in a healthy and competitive way in Europe, we also will be able also to decarbonize. And don't forget, those decarbonization targets are also set by the EU. And part of that is as well that we all together, as consumers, as users, we also need to value, in fact, the green steel products, which is another key element also of the Steel and Metal Action Plan. Create a level playing field, but also create those lead markets that also green steel finds its way to the market, and that we are valuing, in fact, its value. Nobody wants to buy green steel right now because they don't see the value, apparently. Yeah, that is not very helpful when you're, as a steel mill, for instance, need to make major investments in green steel. Also, our investors, in fact, ask, of course, critical questions on that. But we also see that it is unavoidable and that it will come. And let's ensure that Europe, the European steel supply chains, that we will be leading and have a competitive edge also at a global scale here. Let's see it and treat it as an opportunity for all of us. That would be my thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Tayfun, could you please add something from an exporter's point of view on that green steel drive and CBAM impact on it?
Like I said, I mean, when we're trying to lock everything into CBAM and ETS related and so on, but we also have to remember, I know this is not the main subject, but there's new quotas, new protections that are really going to be impacting the imports, but imports into Europe, imports into Turkey as well, because every country is taking some action. This is not part of the green steel making process. This is something else, but everything is getting mixed up. So how the whole free trade or fair trade business or the world trade is going to work out in 2026, it's going to become more clear as we see the supply and demand situation. I think that's also going to impact. I know the subject is green steel. What are we doing about green steel, this and that and so on? But we also have to talk about how are these companies going to make profits? How are they going to manage the whole thing? And so we're only looking at it from the one side, but I think Jan said, I mean, JJ just said, if we get into this, it will take another hour or two before we can actually solve this problem. But there's no net answers. As for the DRI, I just want to add something to that. I mean, if you make a decision today to invest in an electric arc furnace with DRI, it's going to take you 3 to 4 years to complete the whole situation. So, I mean, sometimes 3-4 years is a short time, but sometimes it's a long period. So it's a difficult situation. A lot of the companies need a support in that perspective to do the investment, because in today's world, the steel economy is not supporting all this investment. So a lot of people have hesitations. And as I think you just mentioned a few minutes ago, a lot of people have started putting a hold on their investment because they have other problems right now. So we're talking about one problem, which it's going to be implemented, it's going to happen, but how it's going to impact the total steel business, we're going to go as the business picks up. If the business becomes much more profitable than today, I think a lot of things will move faster. But if it doesn't, a lot of things will move slower. I guarantee you that.
Thank you, Tayfun. And we have a couple of minutes left. Maybe Alfonso, would you like to round up on that?
On this, well, really, CBAM is the smaller brother of ETS, and ETS is really the main tool. So CBAM exists because ETS exists on the first part, and ETS is the tool of having a price for carbon and making having an incentive to go green. But that's on the side of the producers, be them European or foreigners. The next step is that users accept that green is good, but is expensive, or well, let's not say expensive, has a cost. No, going greener has a cost, and you have to pay for this cost. If nobody pays for it, there will be no green thing at all. And that's something that it needs to be in the mind of everyone, because for years we have heard that going green is fantastic, is competitive. Well, it's competitive if somebody recognizes the value of going green. No? And so all of these things, all of the tools we are seeing now, which are many of them, need to go in that direction to send this message that green has a cost.
Thank you, Alfonso. Thank you very much to all panelists. I think we are run out of time, I'm afraid. And here I would like to round up. Thank you for all who registered and attended. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you to EUROMETAL for this opportunity. Thanks to Alfonso, Tayfun, Jaap for participating. And I guess it's not the last time we're discussing CBAM. Yes, the recording and the presentation will be available for registered participants. So until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.